Okay, I'm going to create a music database using dictionaries, and we're going to do this in several or two videos. It turned out I just couldn't fit the whole thing into one video. Um, and this, so the first part of this is just going to be an outline of what this program is going to look like, and it really is just the menu of options that we're going to have. And this very first implementation. So this is just an outline to get me thinking about what I want this program to do. Um, and I'm going to go down to the bottom actually. So here's the real outline of what's going to happen. This is the main part of the program. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to store this music database or music dictionary, is maybe a better way to say it, in a file. So the first thing we're going to do is read in from the file when we run the program. Then we're going to print off a menu, and menu is going to return the user selection, and based on that selection we are going to do different options: print the database, input an artist, or remove the artist. And then once they have chosen to quit, and we're going to talk about what quit is in a minute, once they have chosen to quit, we're going to save to the file, whatever. So this is going to include the stuff that was already in the file, plus whatever they've added to it, that'll be saved back out to the file. Okay? And all this information, is going to be stored in a dictionary. Now, up at the top, I've defined some global variables. And the idea here is that you want to, if you're going to have to hard code information into a program, so like the name of the database file where we're storing all this music information, you only want to do that in one place. You don't want to do it in multiple places, because if you ever have to make a change, or if somebody, worst case, somebody else has to make a change to your program, they're going to have to go through your code and search out anywhere that name is and make the change there. So it's better to have it in one place. So the name of the file, the options that we're going to print out for the user, so they can print the music database, input an artist and their albums, or remove an artist, or quit. And then quit, the value quit, which is an integer, is actually the length of options. So notice I didn't hard code this as the number 4. So if I come in here and I want to add another option to this, I can come up here and change this list, and that will automatically update the quit option for me. Okay, so going down through here, at the moment, read from the file and save to the file actually don't do anything. I had started to write them with an open command and then just passed on that. We're going to save that for a future video, part 3 video. At this point, input artist, print music database, remove artist, they don't do anything either. It's really just a menu command at this point I want to get working. That's complicated enough. I mean, there's a fair amount of code in here for a menu. We make use of the global options and the global quit, which we defined above. Talk about input command in a minute. I mean, you can read it, but we'll talk about it in a minute. Then we go into an infinite loop, and basically this infinite loop is getting the user to type in a choice 1 through 4, or 1 through quit, whatever that happens to be. Okay, options is the list from above of the different options they can choose from. I used a list for that because I always want them to be in the same order. And a list is iterable, so I can set up a for loop on that list. So for each option and options, I'll just print out the options, and then I'm going to ask the user to make a choice. And notice how I wrote this. I didn't say make a choice 1 through 4. I said make a choice 1 through quit. So again, if the length of options changes, this will automatically be changed for me. I don't have to come searching around and looking for 4s everywhere in my code to make a change there. Okay. Now, there's a try command here, because their options are going to be an integer, 1 through 4, but when you do an input, you get a string. So I want to convert that to an integer. Well, if they are working on your program, the user's playing with your program, and a cat walks across their keyboard and types in a letter and hits enter, that when you convert that to an integer, that's going to throw an error, which is going to crash the program. Bad things are going to happen. So it's better to do a try except statement. I'm going to try to convert that to an integer. If that doesn't work, you get a value error. And here's where I'm going to print input command, which is going to tell them you must put in a number from 1 to whatever the last choice is. And then it's going to call menu again. Similarly up here, if the int works, so they actually type in an integer, I'm going to check to make sure that's in between 1 and quit. Emphasizing once again, I didn't type in a 4 here. I used the length of the number of choices list. If it passes all that, if it's an integer in between 1 and quit, then I'm going to return that back to the calling program. If it's outside that range, again, I'm going to print input command and call menu again. It's important that these are return commands here. At this point, when I call menu, if it returns, that means it's returning me a valid numeric answer. And when I get a valid numeric answer on this, I want to return back to the calling program. I don't want to go back up to this while loop and ask them to input again. So in this case, it's important that I return the value that's given to me by menu. Now, why do I have input command defined up here? Well, it's pretty simple. I had basically the same thing going on here. The user's made an error, so I want to ask them to do it again. I had typed out a string here and the same string here, and then I realized it wasn't quite the string I wanted. So I changed the format of a little bit. I put a \n at the beginning. Then I did actually have a 4 here, I will admit. I changed it to quit. And every time I made a change, I had to change in 2 different places. It became kind of a pain. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to define the string input command up here and then just use that. And then if I need to make any more changes, I only have to change it in 1 place. So this is a common theme in programming. If you have something that's going to appear in several different places, just make it a variable. And then if you need to change it, you change it in 1 place and it's changed everywhere. Okay. So let's run this. And there's no such file, songdb.txt, because I eliminated that. I can fix that quickly. PyCharm actually warned me not to get rid of that, and I did anyway. So, all right, let's try that again. So the reason why I got an error there is the very thing this thing does is read from music file, and read from music file does actually try to open the music database as a read-only, and because we're opening as a read-only, it won't create the file. It just goes out and tries to open it. It wasn't there, so it failed. Okay, so let's see what this does. If I type in a 1, it calls print music database, but that hasn't been implemented. 2, input hasn't been implemented. 3, hasn't been implemented. Cat walks across the keyboard, types an S and an enter. This is where we get into the exception. So that's not an integer value. So it asks me to input a number from 1 to 4. And then maybe I type in a 6. So at this point, we are in the except, and we've called menu again. And so now we're running a new version of menu, and we're back in here. We print out the options. We're asking to put in another input. So I put in a 6. That 6 comes down into that version of menu, says that's not in the right range, calls menu again. So we're 3 deep in the menu now. And now I'm going to type in a valid command too. And when I do that, that menu, that 2, comes through here. It's an integer. It's in the right value, so it returns it. That return comes down to this menu command where I typed in the 6. We return that. That goes back to the original calling menu where I typed in the S and says, yep, got a valid number there. It returns that back to the calling program, which then tries to, in this loop, we typed in a 2 as the very last thing. So it calls input artist, and which hasn't been implemented yet. Okay, so at this point what we have is a working menu. Looks complicated, but I think it's fairly robust. It's pretty hard for a user to break this. So we have that working at least. Now we're going to actually implement some music database stuff. So we're going to implement 2 things. We're going to have the user be able to input an artist, and we're going to have the print music database. Everything else in here is the same. Menu's the same. Any program's the same. So let's look at input artist. Now, the format of this music database is going to be a dictionary. The key in the dictionary is going to be the band. So we ask them to input the band, and we actually put that into artist. And then for each band, there's going to be a list of their albums. And each album is actually going to be a list. And it's going to be a list of the album title and the album year. So the user can put in as many albums as they want. So we put this in a while loop until they type in quit. I'm done putting in albums. They input an album. They input a year. We'll get to that in a second. And then we append a list that has the album title and the year to the list of albums for that band. And then when they're done, they say they don't want any more. We come out of this and we return. This is the format for a dictionary. And the dictionary key is the band. And then the value is the list of albums. And remember, the list of albums actually contains a list of album and year. Okay. Let's take a quick peek at input year. I wrote that as a separate procedure because I was being kind of fussy. I wanted to make sure they actually typed in an integer. So I asked them to input a year, and again, I do a try except. I try to convert that to an integer. If that fails, I say you must input a year, and I call input year again. And in the end, I know that I have an integer, so I return it. I could check to make sure this is a valid year, but I didn't worry too much about that. So the user could type in the year 3286 or something. Okay, well, we're going to allow that. So I'm going to actually just input. Let's see, am I running the right thing here? I don't know. I want to run input artist. So I'm going to run this because I want to print off what this dictionary looks like. So I'm going to input an artist, and the band is going to be Van Halen, and one of their first albums was Van Halen. That was from 1978. We'll put in another album. So let's see, they wrote Diver Down in 1982. And we'll put in another one. They wrote 1984 in 1984. And that'll be enough. So we're going to quit out of this. We'll quit inputting albums. We were in this loop right here, inputting album and year. Oops, whoa. My cursor up here. Down here. And hit quit. And now I want to print the music database. This is actually going to print off music list, which is a dictionary. Now, normally I wouldn't do this, but I'm printing off the dictionary version of this because I want you to see what this thing looks like. And then this is going to be the pretty print version of this. So we're going to print music database. And here is the dictionary. So here's the structure of the dictionary. It's band, and then a list. So see the outer brackets. And inside that list is a list of albums, and each album is a list. Title, year, title, year, title, year. All right, let's put in another artist. So let's put in the Beatles. And we'll put in the White Album. And that was written in 1968. And we'll put in another album, Abbey Road. And that's from 1969. And that will be enough. And I'm going to print the music database again. So I want to look at that dictionary. It's funny, you cannot guarantee the order of things in dictionaries. I ran this before, and it put the Beatles first, and now it's putting Van Halen first. But I want to emphasize that you have two keys in here now, two bands, Van Halen and the Beatles, followed by a colon, and then the values are a list of lists. And each list in here is an album. Title, year, title, year, title, year. So it's important you know the structure of this dictionary, especially when I go to look at print music database. So music list is this dictionary. And as a dictionary, we can iterate through it. So I can say for artists in music list, or I should have said for band in music list. So that's going to do Van Halen and Beatles. That's going to be the value of artists. So I'm just going to print that. And that's where it's, so this is where it's printing Van Halen, and then it prints Beatles. And then if print albums is true, so you have an option to not print the albums out. The default's to true. So by default, it's going to print all the albums out. If you want to print the albums out, then we're going to do for album and music list artist. So music list is a dictionary. We go on the key artist. So if the key, for example, was Van Halen, then the value is this list right here, right? So that's the list of albums. So we're saying for each album in that list. So the first album in that list is this list right here. All right, it's a list of lists. And we're going to print that out. And I'm going to indent it. I'm going to indent it the length of the string artist. And then I'm going to print out, the first thing is the name. So that's 0 entry in that list. The name of the album and the year that it was recorded is the second thing in there. And I have to make that a string because that's stored as an integer, right? And then we just go through that entire list with a for loop. The next thing will be diver down, 1982, 1984, 1984. And that for loop then will be done. For the Beatles, it'll come back up to this for loop and go from Van Halen to the Beatles. So that'll be artist. We'll print that out, and then we'll go through its list of albums. And notice the indentation that I put in here. That's this length of the artist times blank at the beginning, so it indents each of the albums over some. But it's really, really important that you keep in mind the structure of this dictionary, because in the next video, we're going to be making big use of that when we implement the save artist and read artist from file commands. We're going to have to really pay attention to the structure of that dictionary, just like we had to do here when we printed stuff out and when we're inputting artist. You really have to know what the structure of that dictionary looks like to get all this straight. I think this is complicated enough. I encourage you to look through this code carefully. This code is making use of a lot of things that we have done so far this semester. And I think making use of them in a complicated way. So look through this code carefully. Look through these outputs. Maybe run it yourself. And good luck. We'll see you next video. Album, comma, year, and just so on until you get to the end of the list. Okay? So when I read this in, I open up an empty dictionary. So we're going to start off with an empty dictionary. This is the first thing this program executes, right, is to read the music in from a file. So we open up an empty dictionary, open up the file in read mode. This for artist in F is a different kind of for loop than the for loops we had in print the database, or print the dictionary. This is a for loop going through a file. So it's going to read that file line by line. So the first line it's going to read in is Beatles, comma, White Album, comma, 1968, comma, Abbey Road, comma, 1969. Well, again, we can't guarantee the order, but you get the idea. That 1969 is going to have a comma on the end of it, and then a new line. So I'm going to strip those two things off. So this strips off the last comma and the new line, and then does a split on a comma. So what that does is it makes a list. So S artist is going to be a list. And the first thing in that list is going to be the Beatles. The second thing in that list will be White Album. Third thing, 1968. Fourth thing, Abbey Road. Fifth thing, 1969. So we have a list with all these things in it. I want the first thing to be the band. So I execute what's called a pop command. We haven't seen this before, but pop for a list takes the first thing of the list, and if I do pop 0, so this is the first thing in the list, it deletes it from the list. but it also returns a value and sets that equal to, in this case, this is going to be the first thing on the list was Beatles, so band is going to be Beatles. Now, I make up an empty list. So now I'm going to form the list of albums. So I'm going to start off with an empty list. Since I popped off the band name, S-Artist now just contains albums. Album, comma, year, comma, album, comma, year, comma, album, comma, year, so on.